The smell of paint and sawdust filled the small workshop at the back of our house, my sanctuary, the place where I poured my thoughts into shapes and colors. My husband, Daniel, used to tease me, saying, "You spend more time here than you do with me." He was right, perhaps. But the workshop wasn't just a room. It was where I felt alive. Daniel worked long shifts at the auto garage, sometimes late into the night. I had gotten used to the loneliness, to the creaks and hums of the tools around me. But that evening, everything felt a little different. A quiet unease in the air, as if something unexpected was waiting at my door. It came with a knock. When I opened the door, there stood Ethan, Daniel's old friend from college, tall, confident, with that same boyish charm I remembered from our wedding photos. I hadn't seen him in almost 4 years. "Hey, Clara," he said, his smile easy, but his eyes tired. "Daniel said I could drop by. I'm in town for a few days." "Oh," I said, slightly startled. "Sure, come in." He stepped inside, looking around the workshop with curiosity. "Still making those wooden resin pieces, huh? Daniel used to show me pictures. Said you were turning into an artist." I laughed softly. "Trying to. It's a slow process." He smiled, then glanced at the half-finished sculpture on the workbench. "You've got talent, Clara." I always thought so. There was something about his tone, calm, genuine, that felt different from Daniel's usual rushed compliments. Ethan's voice carried warmth, not obligation. I offered him tea, and soon we were sitting among paintbrushes and tools, the air smelling of cedar and coffee. We talked about old times, how Daniel and Ethan used to prank their professors, how they once drove across the state in a broken-down car with only $20 between them. As we laughed, I realized how much I missed having someone to talk to, someone who actually listened. At one point, Ethan grew quiet. His gaze drifted toward the open window, where the evening light touched his face. "You know," he said softly, "Daniel's lucky. You built something beautiful here." I didn't know what to say. His words lingered, heavy but sincere. And for a moment, I saw not Daniel's friend, but a man who understood the silence I lived with. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out, a thunderstorm rumbling in the distance. The room dimmed, shadows stretching across the walls. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the moment, "guess we'll have to wait it out." Ethan stood up. "You've got candles somewhere?" I nodded. He found them easily, lighting one with a steady hand. The flame cast a warm glow across his face. We sat again, closer this time, our voices lowering with the hush of rain tapping the window. The storm outside felt like an echo of the quiet tension between us, gentle but charged. "Clara," he said after a pause, "you look different. Not just older, stronger, but lonelier too." His words struck something inside me, a truth I hadn't dared to say aloud. I looked away, tracing circles on my teacup. "Daniel's busy. Always has been. I've learned to keep myself company." Ethan nodded slowly. "I get that. I've been alone for a long time too." There was an honesty in his voice that made my heart ache. I wanted to ask why, what had happened to him since those college days, but I didn't. Some questions were too dangerous to open. Instead, I said quietly, "You can stay here if the rain doesn't stop. The road's too muddy at night." He hesitated, then smiled. "Thanks, Clara. I'd like that." We fell into silence again. The candle flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw him watching me. Not in the way a friend should, but in the way someone does when they see more than they're supposed to. I felt it too, that subtle, forbidden pull. I tried to look away, to pretend it wasn't there, but the air had already changed. The rain grew heavier, the sound filling the small room. I reached for another candle, brushing past him. Our hands touched, just for a second, but it was enough. A current shot through me, electric and undeniable. Ethan froze. His eyes met mine, and the space between us seemed to disappear. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," I whispered, though it wasn't. We both knew it. Moments later, Daniel's headlights flashed through the rain. He was home early. The spell shattered instantly. I stepped back, my heart racing. Ethan exhaled, the faintest smile on his lips, Not mischievous, but knowing. He blew out the candle just as Daniel's footsteps echoed outside. "Evening, love," Daniel called, his voice cheerful and oblivious. He entered, dripping wet. "Hey, Ethan. You made it." The two friends clapped each other on the back, laughing, the room suddenly full of noise and life again. I smiled, pretending nothing had happened, but deep inside, I could still feel that fleeting spark, the one I wasn't supposed to feel. That night, after dinner, Ethan went to the guest room, and Daniel fell asleep almost immediately. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the fading thunder. Somewhere in the dark, I could still see that brief look, the one that said everything we couldn't say aloud. And though nothing had happened, something had. Something had begun. Morning sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, cutting through the faint scent of rain that lingered from the night before. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flicker of that candle and Ethan's eyes behind it. Daniel was already up, whistling in the kitchen, the sound of clinking plates mixing with the hum of the coffee maker. For him, it was an ordinary Saturday. For me, it felt like the beginning of something I didn't know how to stop. When I walked in, Ethan was at the table, reading one of Daniel's magazines, coffee mug in his hand. He looked relaxed, as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. "Morning, Clara," he said softly, his smile easy calm. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound normal. Daniel was telling a story, laughing, gesturing wildly, and Ethan was nodding, but his eyes occasionally met mine. Just a second too long. Just enough to remind me of that spark. After breakfast, Daniel left for a quick errand. Something about picking up a spare part for the garage. He kissed me goodbye, said he'd be back before lunch. The moment the door closed, the silence between me and Ethan thickened. He set his cup down. "I was going to leave early," he said, "but the roads are still muddy." I nodded. "You can stay a little longer if you like." He smiled faintly. "That's dangerous, Clara." I froze. "What do you mean?" He looked up at me, eyes steady. "You know what I mean. Last night, whatever that was." I turned away, pretending to wipe the counter. It was nothing. Just the rain, the atmosphere. Ethan stood. His voice was quiet, almost pained. "You don't have to lie, not to me, and not to yourself." The words hit hard, because deep inside I knew he was right. There had been something there. Not an affair, not a betrayal yet, but a feeling too real to ignore. He took a slow step closer, his tone softening. "Clara, I'm not here to ruin anything. Daniel's my friend. But last night, I saw something in you, something I think you've been hiding for a long time." I wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but my throat closed. The truth was, I had been hiding behind my art, my silence, my workshop. Behind a marriage that had grown comfortable but cold. "I'm fine," I whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. "No, you're lonely." That single word, lonely, stripped away every wall I had built. My breath caught, tears burning my eyes before I could stop them. I tried to look away, but he reached out, his fingers brushing my hand. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The house, the rain, even Daniel. Just that moment, fragile and wrong and real. But before either of us could speak, we heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. "Daniel." I pulled back, heart pounding. "Go," I whispered. Ethan nodded quickly, grabbed his jacket, and stepped outside into the backyard. By the time Daniel entered, smiling with groceries in his arms, Ethan was already pretending to check the car tires, whistling like nothing had happened. That evening, Ethan packed to leave. Daniel insisted on driving him to the station, saying, "Come on, one last ride like old times." When they left, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. My hands trembled as I went back into the workshop. The candle from last night was still there, half melted. I stared at it for a long time, then lit it again. It wasn't about romance anymore. It was about truth, the kind I'd buried under years of routine. 3 weeks passed. Daniel was busier than ever, and Ethan hadn't called. I thought maybe that was for the best. But one afternoon, as I returned from the market, I found a small envelope wedged under the door. No name, just my initials, written in neat handwriting. Inside was a folded note. You don't have to live quietly to be loyal. Find what makes you feel alive again.
E.
I sat there on the porch, the paper trembling in my hand. I didn't know if it was goodbye or a reminder, but it changed something inside me. That evening, I went into the workshop and looked at all my unfinished pieces. For months, I had been sculpting but not really creating. So I picked up my tools, tied my hair back, and began to carve. Days turned into nights. Daniel noticed, even praised me. "You're back to your old self," he said proudly. "I missed that fire in you." He didn't know what had rekindled it, and I didn't tell him, because the truth wasn't about Ethan anymore.
It was about me.
1 month later, my first gallery exhibition opened. Daniel stood by my side, proud and talkative, showing my work to his friends. Among the crowd, I saw a familiar figure at the back, Ethan. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. No smiles, no words, just silent understanding. He waited until the crowd thinned, then walked over. "You did it," he said quietly. "I think I finally learned," I replied. "To live," he asked. I nodded. "To feel." He smiled softly. "Then my work here is done." For a moment, I wanted to say stay, but I didn't. Some people aren't meant to remain. They're meant to wake you up. He left that night without another word. I watched him disappear into the city lights, the echo of rain in my memory. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Everything's fine."
And it was.
Because life had a strange way of reminding you, love isn't always about who stays. Sometimes, it's about who helps you find yourself before they go. Weeks later, I found another note tucked inside one of my sketchbooks, probably left at the exhibition. It read, "Keep creating, Clara. You were never invisible."
E.
I smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it inside my journal. That night, I lit another candle in the workshop, not for him, but for the woman I had finally become. The flame danced softly, casting golden light over the wooden sculpture I had titled Second Chances. Because that's what Ethan had been, not a mistake, not a lover, but a second chance to remember who I was before the silence.